Spirituality, emotion, culture, and social relationships are inseparably intertwined in experiences of trauma and memories of trauma. Understanding trauma, grief, and transgenerational trauma may help in understanding the intersection between spirit and social structures and emotional well being as we experience the trauma of COVID-19. Hello, my name is Laurie Garrett-Cobbina. I'm professor of pastoral care and education for the Shaw Chaplaincy Institute at the University of Redlands Graduate School of Theology. And I want to talk to you about the spiritual response to the crisis and trauma of COVID-19. The experience of trauma is an intellectual, a spiritual, as well as emotional and physical experience. Trauma and grief encompass the body's response to loss, but as well as the emotional and mental and spiritual effects of loss. So the goal for spiritual care in response to the trauma of COVID-19 is not only to lessen the distress of survivors' lives, but also to create a secure human resources that promote active and optimal engagement with a world that contains distress. So I'm going to give you a simple definition of trauma, which is my definition. Trauma is a crisis of meaning. Spiritually, trauma is a crisis of meaning. So COVID-19 is a traumatic event. I'm going to outline 3 phases of trauma relevant for spiritual care in the age of coronavirus. Phase 1 is immediate trauma care. You might think of this phase as spiritual first aid. Let me just say phase 2 is intermediate trauma care, where the significant symptoms of trauma, you begin to see them. In phase 3, the long-term trauma care, it helps people anticipate and prepare for what's going to come. So in phase 1, the immediate spiritual care or spiritual first aid, the first thing you have to establish is safety. It's imperative to restore physical safety. Now, really, in our response to COVID-19, we're still in phase 1 because we have not established physical safety. We have not established a unified response to how to keep people safe and alive during this virus outbreak, so that we're really still in the first phase. As well as another dynamic of this first phase is to really accept that we've had a loss, that there's been a spiritual loss has happened that the body and the soul are responding to, and accept the reality of the loss. The third thing that I really want to emphasize is the need for clarity in the first phase. And I would even say clarity is more important than empathy in the first phase, because people really need to understand what's happening. They need, in this phase, it's helpful to be in your body, grounded, and be a stable, reliable, trustworthy source of factual information in the midst of tragic loss, because people are confused about what's happening. And so to be that kind of spiritually grounded leader and provider of care is important to provide clarity. Also, you'll begin to listen to stories, listen with the heart, and really, we're going to be going into the wilderness of the soul with others. We're going into a wilderness where we'll be walking around. We don't know how long we'll be there, but in the wilderness, we're going to be really feeling the effects of the crisis, of the trauma. In phase 2, the intermediate care, the goal is to strengthen the capacity for emotional expression. That is, in this phase 2, you really want to move into your empathy. And I think what's important about phase 2 is to embrace complexity and to construct new interpretations for what's happening. In other words, something is happening that we don't understand, so we have to construct an interpretation of it. And here you might expect intense expression of feelings like anger and blame and guilt. Phase 3, the long-term spiritual care, is the goal of this long-term care is for spiritual care to move into social collectives and socio-political systems to practice justice. Now, often there's a justice issue, a historical justice issue that is impacting even why the trauma occurs, the rise of the trauma, so that it's important when you're thinking of spiritual care to it being a positive influencer of social structures so that they work for justice. So this is a time of struggle in this phase 3. And it's important for the spiritual care provider not to reassure or absolve too quickly, because it takes time for traumatized people to come to the acceptance of the nature of how things have changed forever. So this is to sum this up, I want to say that trauma is a collective experience. And do you believe that collective healing is possible for a people who have experienced social and physical and moral trauma? So I think if we think about trauma as a collective experience, I think it gives us this opportunity to start with looking at and engaging our social constructs that contribute to trauma in our interconnected, intersectional flesh and blood and spirits of existing in a web of relationships, some that are healing and some that are destructive. But when we're in the trauma together, we have a chance to create a new thing. When we engage, when we care, a new thing can happen. And when this new thing happens, it can be a thing of caring. It can be a thing of kindness and mercy. It can be a thing of justice and loving engagement for one another and all of creation. And that is where we're called as spiritual care providers. Thank you.